Welcome. You are at the CCC where there are no outside issues. My name's Anthony. I'm an addict and an alcoholic, another bozo on the bus, and I care about you. Each week, we will provide and create a brave space. So many of y'all know Louis is not here, so I'm doing both of our parts. So you're just going to listen to me while I read off. Okay, so each week, we will provide and create a brave space where we can engage in conversations around topics of recovery. Fuck you, Louis. When you hear this is your fault. Our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for more people in recovery by tackling issues sometimes used to separate us. Before we do that, please like, subscribe, comment, share, tell your friends about us, tell your exes about us, tell your mom about us. And now the disclaimer: the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on At the CCC are ours alone. We do not represent anyone but ourselves. The material shared here is for general information purposes only. In other words, we are just a couple of friends, although it's just me, behind a mic here to entertain you. So for those who are watching or listening, Louis isn't here today. Louis is currently listening to Janet Jackson at the Chase Center today. So that's what's going on there. And then I'm just going to go straight into our introduction for our very special guest today. So we're going to have Stephan on today, who, for those watching, he's in the screen right next to me. So I wrote this for him because I was doing all this research on him and I was like, wow, he is pretty impressive. So Stephan is a queer legal scholar and activist attorney whose work has been featured in Harvard's LGBTQ policy journal. He's known also by his adult film name, Blue Bailey. He combines his legal expertise and personal experiences to advocate for social change, especially in issues related to sexual health and law. Stephan's journey through addiction and recovery, detailed in his memoir, Blue Movie, offers a raw look at his struggles and triumphs of his life. He is actively involved with organizations like the Practicing Law Institute, using his platform to challenge stigma surrounding HIV and sex work. In other words, Stephan is kind of a big deal. He's actually pretty cool, and I'm really excited to have him on today. Stephan, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the really kind introduction.
Yeah, I mean, it was all truthful. So Stephan, thank you for coming on. I'm really excited to have you on today. As you know, and for people listening, this is our Sex and Recovery Month. And for those who may be familiar with Stephan is also known as Blue Bailey, so we thought we would have him on. But Stephan also has a very interesting set of his experiences, especially his experiences with law. And he recently moved. So anyway, I just want to jump in so I'm not talking for you. So we ask all of our guests 3 questions. First question for you is, where are you from?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada. I lived there until I was 18, and then I moved to San Francisco. I was there another 18 years. And then just a couple of months ago in February, I moved for work to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm here for the foreseeable future.
Nice. And what made you get sober?
Yeah, I guess my first kind of interactions with recovery started when I was like 19 around crystal meth, and I've tried a lot of different recovery methods, but most recently, my partner I was using a lot of meth and not showing up in my relationship, and my partner set some boundaries, and then I started crossing boundaries with work and crossing boundaries with my family, and that kind of just led me to kind of reevaluate my substance use at that point and kind of return to CMA and 12-step and just kind of harm reduction in general.
And that was when you were 19?
No, when I first started, I went to AA when I was 19.
Okay.
And that really wasn't a fit for me at that time. I felt like everyone at that age just needed to be messy. So it took over a decade, or it took a long minute to kind of explore and circle back to what I'm doing right now.
I feel that that's super relatable. We'll come back to that. That's really interesting. And then our last question that we ask all of our guests is, what's your relationship with your higher power?
Yeah, I'm not super religious. So I've had to redefine what the higher power is for me. And to me, I kind of take a matrix or mathematics approach. I kind of believe in algorithms, like sodium and chloride put together is salt. There's certain equations in the world that are true. And if like recovery is the number 10 to me, you can get the 10, 5 plus 5, 8 plus 2, 20 minus 10. There's many different ways to get there. But my higher power is that there are algorithms and patterns in life.
I love that. That's really cool. So let's jump in.
Sure.
All right. So it's Pride Month. And it's Pride Month. And one of the things I really appreciated about a lot of the work that you've done is that it's really been centered on normalizing certain behaviors, really bringing light to like micro communities. So for example, you wrote this excellent article on like the history of bathhouses and how there were certain spaces that were created for gay men or gay folks in general as like cultural centers. So I'm wondering if you know, now that it's Pride Month, like what Pride like means for you and maybe how that's changed over the years.
Yeah. I think pride for me means visibility. It means being out and proud. Like I used to work in bars, so pride used to be just another working holiday for me, and I wasn't actually a huge fan of pride. But I think, especially like in our political climate, it's important to be out and proud and visible in whatever sub community you live in. If you're a sober leather fister, it's important to be visible so other sober leather fisters can feel comfortable coming out. And even with like, I know there's like a lot of controversy around corporate pride, but I'd rather have corporations like being supportive and having those images and support out there than the reverse of not having it at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm wondering. So it's interesting. You've mentioned leather and you've mentioned fisting, and I'm wondering like why those things in particular.
Because those are the communities I'm in, and they were the first two kind of sub communities that came up.
Yeah. That's okay. No trick questions, I promise. Yeah. Okay, so visibility is important. I'm wondering, so let's talk a little bit about like your career in adult film. And I'm wondering kind of how your experiences with adult film and recovery maybe have overlapped, or did they ever clash?
Sure. I would say they overlapped and haven't really clashed. I did a lot of work for Bareback Studios and Treasure Island, where the aesthetic is kind of like cracked out or chemsex. And based on that aesthetic, a lot of people assumed that I'm high in my videos. I've only been high in a porn scene once on crystal meth. And I was so paranoid and so insecure that it was not something I ever wanted to repeat. So except for that one scene, most of my scenes are sober. I'm sorry. What was the beginning question?
Yeah. It's okay. Just follow your stream of consciousness. It's fine. So basically what I was asking is if your experiences with recovery and your like experiences in adult film, if they ever clashed or if they overlapped.
Yeah. They more overlapped. During the actual work, I was never using my drug of choice. But being a sex worker did make it easier to use substances outside of that, because a lot of people either wanted to hire you to do substances with them, or just by hanging out with you, you got access to substances for free. And that became like super problematic for me. I remember one time I got offered to go party with some dude in London, and I missed my flight so many times that I got there, I was cracked out with him for like 2 days, and I came back, and I think it was on the plane longer than I was actually supposed to be in London with the dude.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have experiences doing sex work as well as adult film?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And so I guess, would you say then that you have experiences with like, or rather that chemsex was a big part of maybe early recovery for you?
Yeah. So in early recovery for me, I feel like when you go into a recovery room, there's a lot of suggestions, and everyone's suggestion is valid. And for certain people, the suggestion not to have sex right away is valid and is helpful. When I first entered the rooms, that wasn't an option for me because sex was part of my work. I couldn't really just stop doing that. And nor did I want to stop doing that. But I had to find like ways to kind of be safer around it. So kind of doing more traditional sex work, I had to take off the table because the access to drugs was just so easy. But doing other sex work like OnlyFans or studio work, where there was a lot more kind of control around the scene and who was showing up and what substances would or would not be there, was a much safer scene to do things.
Yeah. I love that you're bringing up this idea of safety. So one of the things that we've talked about on the show, or at least that I've talked about on the show, has been around the like over sexualization of gay men. But one of the things that I also try to hold, and one of the things that I've gotten to is like understanding that, well, let me back up here. So there was a part of me for a really long time where I thought like, you know, as gay men, we're over sexualized. Everything seems to be centered around sex, right? And then I finally got to a point in recovery where I'm like, it's really none of my fucking business what anyone is doing. Like if I don't want to have, you know, like if I don't want to hook up, I don't have to hook up, right? Or if I don't want to participate in these things. So I'm wondering if like in your experiences, whether like how your opinion about sex has changed, like either in recovery, either in and out of like porn or sex work, etc.
Yeah. I think the most notable thing that I've noticed, and I've only noticed this maybe in the last year, is there are certain things that I thought I was interested in, that I'm not really interested in sober. And that's not necessarily like kink related. It's more kind of like settings. Like I tried very hard to still go to like the Club 6 parties and the parties that started at 10 and ended at 6 a.m.
What's
And
a Club 6 party? I don't know what that is.
Oh, kind of like the Pride and Dory Alley and like Folsom, like
okay.
sex parties. That have like a circuit element to them. And I tried going to them sober because I thought that was like the cool thing to do. And that's what everyone did. And like 9 out of 10 times, I wasn't triggered when I went there, but I was too tired. It wasn't a situation that I felt sexual in. And I don't mind playing with people that aren't sober, but the people that kind of go to circuit parties, like the disconnect is a little bit too much for my energy level and their energy level. And that's something I discovered after that isn't really so much for me. So lately, if I go to sex parties, they're more bar based or they're more like house based, and they tend to happen in the early afternoon, early evening.
So one of the things that I think like the subtext of what you're describing is like you have a strong sense of like what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And I'm wondering that like what was that journey like, right? So speaking personally, like it wasn't until like I got sober that I realized like what worked for me and what didn't work for me, and then being able to either move toward those things or like learning how to say no or yes. So I'm kind of curious how you've figured out like what feels healthy and right to you.
Yeah, a lot of it is trial and error. I would say if someone does have issues with substance use and sex, the most safest way is maybe to take a break. But if you don't want to take a break and that's the level of risk you're willing to take, for me, I had to kind of discover what my gray areas were and come up with kind of like, for lack of a better word, like a sex contract with myself. I knew that if I would go on apps and I didn't explicitly put in my profile no meth or ask people no meth, I would gravitate to those profiles and I wouldn't block them right away. And I may not hook up with that person right away, but I would know exactly where to go to when I would be feeling in kind of a vulnerable state. I remember like the first maybe like 6 months, I wouldn't really feel comfortable hooking up. I had the no gremlin rule, no sex after midnight, because like sex after midnight would get me in trouble.
Right.
I had to like, I really only rejoined like Scruff and Sniffies here in Pittsburgh because I don't know people here. But in San Francisco, it was an easy way for me to access drugs. And if I wanted casual sex, instead of the apps, I switched to hooking up at the gym or going to Buena Vista Park. I would have to have like the buddy system, which I use for sex work. It's checking in with someone before and after hooking up and letting them know where you're at, just for accountability. Kind of like just kind of examining all my bullshit of like how I would like unintentionally let myself get into sketchy situations and building ways to avoid them.
Hmm. One of the things I really appreciate about the way you're arriving at this conversation is like how candid you are about like sex and sexuality for you. And I'm wondering, have you always been that way? Have you always felt like very comfortable about like your own sexuality and like the way you approach sex?
Yeah, I think so. I really started having sex. I didn't really have sex at all in high school.
Hmm.
I started exploring sexuality when I moved to San Francisco, uh, hooking up and partying and using MapQuest to figure out my way around San Francisco. And I tested positive at 19, and that was like just before PrEP came out. It was before equals you equals you. There was a lot of stigma around it, and I moved home to Las Vegas, where there was even more stigma than San Francisco.
Right.
And I think having to face that and just kind of like personally defend the stigma caused me just to be maybe to overshare and to like take control of the narrative. Or if I'm being open about my sexuality and controlling the narrative, you have less power over where that goes.
Right, right. You know, I'll share a story with you that's really relatable. So I found out I was pause, I think in 2010, and I remember, you know, a story I've shared with friends, and I don't think I've ever shared this online, but when I found out I was HIV positive, I was in a relationship and I'd broken up with my partner at the time, and he and his friends retaliated. And what they did is they took my picture and they created all these fake accounts on like Adam for Adam and on Grindr and on OkCupid and on Craigslist and on Facebook, and they disclosed my status and all my personal information. They reached out to my family. Like the goal was to essentially use, and this was before PrEP, it was essentially to use my HIV status to essentially terrorize me. Right.
Mm.
And so I think about like the word of like reducing, like when you talk about like reducing stigma, the reason why something like that could happen was because there was stigma, you know, like I think doing something like that, I don't know that something like that would actually like work in a place like San Francisco. You know, you would end up looking like an asshole if you're trying to use someone's status against them.
Yeah. I actually, like, when I first came back to CMA, had a similar kind of anxiety around I didn't care when I used if people like took pictures or video, and I was super worried that like people would try to use that against me or release videos of me partying. And I remember even one time I was like chatting with friends. I was like, you know, when you get those emails and they ask for $500 and for to like not share your pictures, and they're like, no, we don't ever get any of those.
Yeah, yeah.
But again, kind of like taking control of the narrative. If I'm honest and transparent with my friends about my substance use and these videos come out, the person who releases them looks like the asshole. And yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I was last week, I was talking about like the importance of like, I hate using the word authentic because it just feels so like played out. But like I want to transition to like your legal work and like your foray into going to law school. And one of the things that I really appreciate is that like you've used law as a way of like seeing through and advocating for those things that you care about, right? I think one of the things that I read about you is that you consider yourself like a progressive, like activist type of lawyer. And so I'm wondering, like, what has it been like to arrive like authentically in those spaces that tend to be very conservative?
Yeah. So when I was going to law school, I had a lot of fear that I wasn't going to pass the California bar based on my past experiences. And I spoke with a couple of queer mentors at my school. It basically let me in that as long as you haven't committed a crime of dishonesty like fraud, you'll be fine with the bar as long as you're transparent with them, um, or not paying child support, which is a weird one. But I was like applying for jobs, and I was wondering like what to do. Like I had published articles about like PrEP and HIV, and I had volunteered, but it was volunteering for like Folsom Street events, and the articles were under my stage name. And I'm like, do I include these on my resume? Is that gonna like out me in a way that I don't want to be outed? And the advice I kind of got was that yes, being out as a professional in this way is going to close some doors, but it's probably doors that I'm not going to want to walk through, or feel comfortable once walking through them. And ultimately will open up other doors that I won't feel comfortable walking through. And if I have to kind of lie or hide that part of myself, I'm probably not going to be happy in the long run. And it was really in law school. I used to have like a Facebook account for Stephan, a Facebook account for Blue. It was really after law school that I just started to kind of merge both personalities back together and kind of use one persona.
Yeah, you're speaking to my heart. I like that's something that I've struggled with too. I talked about it last week about next year I'll graduate from graduate school. I'll be able to call myself a psychologist, or rather, I'll be a psychologist. And so that's a very conservative environment. And I've been thinking a lot about what are the things that I'll be foreclosing on by like writing more openly about like gay issues or like, and even with the podcast, like talking about sex or my sexual experiences, right? These kind of like spaces that a lot of people shy away from, right? Either because of shame or because of how it might impact work. And so I can really relate to that. I'm wondering, you're reminding me of this author, Kenjin Yoshino. He wrote this book. He's actually a lawyer. He was at NYU, and he wrote this book called, I think it was called Uncovering, and basically was about how one of the things that he was worried about was, as a legal scholar, he was afraid of being known as like the gay man who's a legal scholar. And I'm wondering if you ever, like when you're thinking about like your own career, like was there well, I guess currently, is there ever a part of you that's like, I don't want to just be pegged as like this gay man who does sex work, who is also a lawyer?
Yeah, I never really had that concern. I actually had that concern more about being open about my recovery. I produced some substance use ethics classes for the Practicing Law Institute, and there was kind of a concern that that would kind of pigeonhole me into just like the recovery attorney. In regards to the sex work, my day-to-day legal work, I work as in-house counsel, so I don't work in that field, but I do like spending my extra time and resources to kind of help the community. And I guess that started way back, like when I was doing porn. Again, it was before prep. I kind of took a reverse course. Most people would do like mainstream condom porn. And then when that success kind of like waned out, would transition to bareback. I started bareback and switched to mainstream condom and experience kind of like stigma from the gay community itself, which is like what led me to be more vocal about issues around HIV. And then when I went to law school and there were like laws and stuff coming out, being vocal about that.
You know what's wild as I'm listening to you, that because of your experiences, you have like an inside view on what sound like trends in porn. But like from the outside, it's like, I would have never known that that was a thing, right? That there was like condom porn and then there was like bareback porn, and that there would be things associated with either one of those things as like a person in industry.
Yeah. I filmed with a dude who was very mainstream. I did his first like official bareback video. And then he got very upset with me. He knew my status. I knew his status, but he got very upset with me that afterwards I did an interview with Treasure Island where I talked about being positive, because even me being open about being positive implicated that he was positive, regardless of whether he was or not. And I think for a minute he like pulled his bareback line for quite some time until it became acceptable.
You know what's wild to me, Stephan, is that like the amount, like I never thought about like the level of like stigma and shame I had about like HIV in general until I became pause myself. So like I remember when I was negative and I was like dating and I found out someone was HIV positive, like I remember thinking like, oh, I'm open-minded, but I would like withdraw because it was like, I just can't deal, you know? But then when I became HIV positive, I realized like I was looking at myself through the same lens. And so I was like filled with like a lot of shame and a lot of like having to make all kinds of decisions. Like, who do I disclose to? Do I not disclose? And this was before prep, which I think has changed everything.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. At one point, I was super close to getting that goddamn biohazard tattoo.
Same. Yeah.
And no judgment against it, but like I think my personal view at that time was that like I got HIV, my body was already trashed. I'm doing drugs. Who cares? Why not trash it more?
Right.
And I really don't think it was until like prep and you came out that was like, oh, that's really like not the case. Like my body isn't a biohazard, and great for people who have that too. It's not for me, and I'm glad I didn't get that one.
Right. Yeah. Samesies. It would have been like outdated, you know? at this point.
Yeah, vintage.
So let's talk a little bit about your book. What motivated you to write Blue Movie?
Yeah, so I've done I did a lot of academic writing in law school. One of the first papers I wrote was on Prop 60, is what AIDS Healthcare Foundation tried to do to pass condoms and porn. Um, and when I started my own law practice, Unbound Edition Press reached out to me to do some clearance work for one of their authors. He had talked about his experience being HIV positive, and we wanted to make sure that everything that he was publishing in the book wasn't going to get him in trouble. And with working with the publisher, we started developing a friendship and a personal relationship, and we talked about the possibility of me writing a book that was going to be more academic focused. It was going to talk about porn, HIV, anti-assimilation, recovery, substance use. And I wrote like 5 different essays. And in those essays, I put a lot of my personal experiences into them. And as we were going through the editing process, we really thought it would just be more fun, instead of doing an academic piece, into turning it into a novel. And kind of just pulling that out and rechanging the format. And in doing so, he was like, if you were to write a novel, like, who's your favorite author? What would you want it to be? And I really love like horror books. My favorite author is Bret Easton Ellis, and my favorite book is Less Than Zero. So I kind of took like the 5 academic essays I wrote and tried to like rewrite them in my Bret Easton Ellis kind of like Less Than Zero voice. And that's where the book Blue Movie came from.
That's really awesome. Kind of a hard pivot. You've mentioned well, there's some things that I really wanted to talk about. And the other thing is, I want to invite our viewers, because invite our viewers, if they have any questions for you or for me, or just have like things that they want to share, please, of course, write in. So you've talked about, you mentioned in passing your relationship. And then you have also I'm assuming that the relationship is open. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's open. So
okay.
It's always been open.
It's always been open. So, can you share a little bit about like how you arrived at like knowing that you want to be in an open relationship, and how you navigate that like as a sober person?
Yeah. So we started long distance. So we kind of had to come up before we started. We're living in the same city, and now we're long distance again. We kind of, I don't know, like coming from San Francisco, I wanted to like, you want to have like this free love, no rules kind of like vibe to you. But in practicality, having like no framework or no boundaries and no rules is just like a recipe for chaos. And after like miscommunications and things like that, we decided to come up with kind of a relationship contract, like how I have a contract with myself around hooking up and substance use. We have a relationship contract about how we hook up with others and what that means. Part of that has like the buddy system built in, where we let each other know when we're hooking up. But there's a lot of other parameters about how we deal with the open relationship. Both of us agree in polyamory in concept, but at this stage in our life, that's not what we're looking for. So the boundaries are tailored to keep an open relationship, but not have polyamory.
Can you explain the difference between the two of them, and why?
Yeah.
And so explain the difference between the two of them, and how you know that polyamory is not something that you're interested in now.
Sure. So the difference between an open relationship and polyamory is, an open relationship is you're free to go out and have casual sex with strangers and friends. Polyamory would be, whether it's sexual or not, developing romantic or kind of deeper connections with other people. And we're definitely open to developing deeper connections with other people, but we're not looking for multiple romantic partners. Why it doesn't work for me? One, me and my partner are long distance again. I love him very much, but it's a lot to handle long distance with one person. And 2, I tend to overthink things a lot, and especially in early recovery, with like the meth paranoia still kind of like kicking in, and feeling so insecure because my life was on track and my finances were in order. My career wasn't in order. I was constantly relapsing. Like if I was dating me, I wouldn't want to stay in a relationship. So I constantly feared that my partner wouldn't want to be there. and I could really only handle that anxiety with one person.
Yeah, that's real. So I have so many like follow-ups to that. So one of the things that I think about is, so I'm in SLAW, right? And so that's sex and love addiction, right? And one of the things that I had to be, I'm in a monogamous relationship now. And so one of the things before I got into my relationship is I had to be very careful about not making to make sure that my sexual behavior didn't border or didn't become entirely like addictive, right? Like, and some of my behavior was like very compulsive. Like I had multiple partners all the time and it would interfere with work and all types of other things. And so I'm wondering, like in your own experiences, do you ever feel like, do you use an addiction lens or like framework to think about like sex?
Yeah, so I don't identify as a sex addict. I definitely do identify with impulses around sex. After becoming sober, I was diagnosed with ADD, and I'm doing like a non-stimulant treatment. But in like looking at my patterns of use, I never really planned to be like, oh my God, I'm going to buy a bag of meth and use this weekend. It would be, I get myself into a situation where I'm at someone's house and it's there and I use, and it's a very kind of like impulsive decision. Um, so I had to like find and build in a framework to kind of like keep a distance with that. And I think one of the most important things that I've learned for me is that if I have a plan in place, I can't impulsively change that. Like when I wasn't using an app or sniffies and I would go travel, like I couldn't just by myself be like, oh, you know what? I'm horny. I want to get on sniffies. Like that would require like a conversation with my sponsor, a conversation with my partner about ways. It's not saying I can't do it, but there needs to be some intention and thought around doing it and how to be safe doing it. And if I'm not able to do that and 100% walk away, then it's not the right time to do that.
That's right. That's one of the things that one of the things I really appreciate about my SLAW sponsor. One of the things he says is like, if it's urgent, it's not sober, And
Yeah.
so I love like what you're describing here, which is like, like, yes, you can engage, you can have the kind of sex you want, you can have the kind of freedom in life that you want. But this idea of like intention, which is another way I think of saying like pausing and really thinking about like what it is that you're doing before you're doing it. Right. Does that feel like a fair characterization of what you're saying?
No, I think that's 100% spot on.
Yeah. So I'm curious about like, you just moved to Pittsburgh, you're in Pennsylvania. That is a very different place from San Francisco. I know that because I'm like I said to you before we went on air, I'm from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which is 6 hours from where you are now. And what's it like, to be there, as a sober person, as someone who's coming from San Francisco?
Yeah, that part's a lot different. I'm used to walking a block down the street and going to a same CMA meeting that's mostly men and mostly queer men. Here, there's no CMA. It's just NA and AA. There's two in the whole city. There's two specific LGBTQ meetings. So it's been a little bit different having to switch to NA. I feel like I had a very progressive sponsor in San Francisco, and Pittsburgh isn't that progressive. So it was a little bit of a journey to find a sponsor here, but I eventually found someone, and I don't know. I don't feel as motivated to go to meetings. I know I need to, but I am more motivated when I travel to go to meetings. I just went to IML. IML has leather meetings at their event. I just went to AIDS Life Cycle. They have meetings. So I really enjoy when I travel.
Is it International Men's Leather?
Mr. Leather, yeah.
Mr. Leather. Okay. Okay.
It's a fun event in Chicago during Memorial Weekend.
Okay. Brandon writes, why don't you start your own CMA meeting there?
So I haven't put too much effort into it, but I have at like a few meetings asked if people would be interested. And at least the people that I've asked, it doesn't seem like crystal meth is their main substance, drug of choice. It seems like the opioids are more prevalent here. And yeah.
That's a good answer, Brandon. I hope you got what you needed from that. I was saying when you said you moved to Pennsylvania, my first thought was like, holy shit, I wonder how he's adjusting to that. Because whenever I go back home, I'm out and I'm pretty public, about my like status and about, like just all things about my life. But whenever I go back to Pennsylvania, there is a part of me that still feels uncomfortable. So I'm wondering, you don't have the same sober community that you did out here. How are you, I guess, managing that?
Yeah. So I'm a fister, and my first couple of friends that I met here have been at fisting parties, and they've been great. Um, uh, Being on the apps, like it is different, like, and not necessarily from a sober aspect. Like I now that I use the apps, I explicitly put sober and no meth in my profile, and I think that filters out most of the people who are partying. But it is very like pause phobic here. Like on sniffies, like if you're positive, a lot of people like don't even want to bother hooking up with you, even if they're on prep and even if I'm undetectable.
Yep. Yep.
Which is weird.
Yep. Yeah, I feel that. And in a way, I'm, I wonder if like, does that kind of feel like it, like a regression? Like whenever I go back to Pennsylvania, I always feel like I'm stepping at least 15 years back in time, especially when it comes to like being a game. Like one of the things, like sometimes I forget I'm HIV positive because either everyone around me is HIV positive or because everyone's on PrEP and doesn't give a fuck. But when I go to Pennsylvania, I like for example, my family to this day is like, don't tell anyone you're positive. Like when I'm back home, like no one needs to know that you're HIV positive. So I'm wondering if it feels like you're stepping back in time while you're there.
Yeah, very much. Like I have a similar experience. Like I forgot that it was HIV positive in San Francisco, but I'm very much reminded of it here, especially hooking up with strangers. I saw a very interesting like article or meme or something. I think it was from the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, but it was bringing up the question that like in the age of being undetectable, like should you have to disclose that you're HIV positive? And I know that like legally, a lot of the laws are still fucked up, and you need to disclose in certain states legally. But like I think ethically and morally, if you're not presenting a harm to someone and you can't transmit, I don't see any reason why that's anyone else's business.
Yeah, HIV legislation is so interesting to me. That's like a whole that's like a whole other episode is HIV legislation. There are places, I think in Louisiana, where if you don't even have to have sex with someone, but if you're dating someone and there's like the chance of hooking up, that could be criminalized. Right. So HIV legislation is all over the place, and there are places where, people have done jail time. There are people in prison now because of HIV disclosure and HIV laws. So that's very interesting. So we have a few quality minutes left on the clock. And so I'm wondering if you have, it's Pride Month. We've talked about recovery. We've talked about sex. And I'm wondering if like for folks listening who have some anxieties around, Pride Month and like staying sober during these times, if you have any advice or any ideas that you want to share with them.
Yeah. I guess my advice would be have a game plan, always kind of know what you're doing. I like to like stay super busy and distract myself. I actually find like events like Pride Weekend or like IML to be less triggering because there's just so much to do and keep yourself occupied and busy with. And if I ever feel like uncomfortable doing something, or if there's a chance that I'm not able to say no to math, that's just a sign that that event, that night at Steamworks isn't appropriate. It doesn't mean that Steamworks in general isn't appropriate. It's just maybe do something different that night. I think being kind of just like open with someone, if whether it's your sponsor or like your partner or a buddy, about what you're into and what you want to do. Like if you want to get into some like weird, kinky, extreme stuff over the weekend, like find someone that you could talk about that with so it doesn't feel like a secret. And then if you are like using substances, go out and get test strips, get clean needles, keep yourself safe.
Amen. That's so great, Stephan. What a nice way to land. So before we not check out, but before we like land the plane, I just want to thank you again for coming on. This has been a really nice conversation. Thank you for volunteering your time, and I wish for you a very happy Pride Month.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Happy Pride.
Thanks. The Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBT recovery community. We provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth. You can find more information, including all the ways to contact us, at www.castrocountryclub.org/podcast. Tune in every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time when we go live on our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels. Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.